This is English shorthand dictation number 145 and the dictation speed is 160 words per minute. Ready? Start. Honorable members, let us take a common market situation where the law is very important. This is the issue of workers' wages. Private companies, contractors and businessmen normally want to make as much profit as they can. In the drive for profits, they might deny workers their rights and not pay them wages. In the eyes of the law, it is illegal or wrong to deny workers their wages. Similarly, to ensure that workers are not underpaid or are paid fairly, there is a law on minimum wages. A worker has to be paid not less than the minimum wage by the employer. The minimum wages are revised upwards every few years. As with the law on minimum wages, which is meant to protect the workers, there are also laws that protect the interests of producers and consumers in the market. These laws help in ensuring that the relations between workers, consumers and producers are governed in a manner that is not exploitative. But merely making laws is not enough. The government has to ensure that these laws are implemented. This means that the law must be enforced. Enforcement becomes even more important when the law seeks to protect the weak from the strong. For instance, to ensure that every worker gets fair wages, the government has to regularly inspect work sites and punish those who violate the law. When workers are poor or powerless, the fear of losing future earnings or facing reprisals often forces them to accept low wages. Employers know this well and use their power to pay workers less than the fair wage. In such cases, it is crucial that laws are forced. Through making, enforcing and upholding these laws, the government can control the activities of individuals or private companies so as to ensure social justice. Many of these laws have their basis in the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. For instance, the right against exploitation says that no one can be forced to work for low wages or under bondage. Similarly, the Constitution lays down that no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or mines or engaged in any other hazardous employment. In recent years, while the courts have come out with strong orders on environmental issues, these have sometimes affected people's livelihoods adversely. For instance, the courts directed industries in residential areas in Delhi to close down or shift out of the city. Several of these industries were polluting the neighborhood, and discharge from these industries was polluting the river Yamuna because they had been set up without following the rules. But while the court's action solved one problem, it created another. Because of the closure, many workers lost their jobs. Others were forced to go to distant places where these factories had relocated. The same problem now began to come up in these areas. Now these places became polluted and the issue of the safety conditions of workers remained unaddressed. Recent research on environmental issues in India has highlighted the fact that the growing concern for the environment among the middle classes is often at the expense of the poor. For example, slums need to be cleaned as part of a city's beautification drive, or a polluting factory is moved to the outskirts of the city. While this awareness of the need for a clean environment is increasing, there is little concern for the safety of the workers themselves. The challenge is to look for solutions where everyone can benefit from a clean environment. One way this can be done is to gradually move to cleaner technologies and processes in factories. The government has to encourage and support factories to do this. It will need to fine those who pollute. This will ensure that the workers' livelihoods are protected and both workers and communities living around the factories enjoy a safe environment. Laws are necessary in many situations, whether this be the market, office or factory, so as to protect people from unfair practices. Private companies, contractors and business persons always look for ways and methods to make higher profits. For this, they resort to unfair practices such as paying workers low wages, employing children for work, ignoring the conditions of work, ignoring the damage to the environment and to the people in the neighborhood, etc. Therefore, a major role of the government is to control the activities of private companies by making, enforcing, and upholding laws so as to prevent unfair practices and ensure social justice. This means that the government has to make appropriate laws and also has to enforce the laws. Laws that are weak and poorly enforced can cause serious harm, as the Bhopal gas tragedy showed. While the government has a leading role in this respect, people can exert pressure so that both private companies and the government act in the interests of society. Environment is one example where people have pushed a public cause and the courts have upheld the right to healthy environment as intrinsic to the right to life. People now must demand that this facility of healthy environment be extended to all. Likewise, workers' rights is an area where the situation is still very unfair. People must demand stronger laws protecting workers' interests so that the right to life is achieved for all. There are some essential facilities like water, healthcare, and sanitation that need to be provided for everyone. Similarly, there are things like electricity, public transport, schools, and colleges that are also necessary. These are known as public facilities. The important characteristic of a public facility is that once it is provided, its benefits can be shared by many people. For instance, a school in the village will enable many children to get educated. Similarly, the supply of electricity to an area can be useful for many people. Farmers can run pump sets to irrigate their fields. People can open small workshops that run on electricity. Students will find it easier to study, and most people in the village will benefit in some way or the other. Given that public facilities are so important, someone must carry the responsibility of providing these to the people. This someone is the government. One of the most important functions of the government is to ensure that these public facilities are made available to everyone. Let us try and understand why the government and only the government must bear this responsibility. We have seen that private companies operate for profit in the market. In most of the public facilities, there is no profit to be had. For example, what profit can accrue to a company for keeping the drains clean? A private company will probably not be interested in undertaking such work. But for other public facilities such as schools and hospitals, private companies may well be interested. We have many of these, particularly in large cities. Similarly, if you are living in a city, you will have seen private companies supplying water through tankers or supplying drinking water in sealed bottles. In such cases, private companies provide public facilities but at a price that only some people can afford. Hence, this facility is not available to all at an affordable rate. If we go by the rule that people will get as much as they can pay for, then many people who cannot afford to pay for such facilities will be deprived of the opportunity to live a decent life. Clearly, this is not a desirable option. Public facilities relate to people's basic needs. Any modern society requires that these facilities are provided so that people's basic needs are met. The right to life that the Constitution guarantees is for all persons living in this country. Therefore, the responsibility to provide public facilities must be that of the government. Every year, the government budget is presented in the Parliament. This is an account of the expenses the government has made on its programs in the past year and how much it plans to spend in the coming year. In the budget, the government also announces the various ways in which it plans to meet these expenses. The main source of revenue for the government is the taxes collected from the people, and the government is empowered to collect these taxes and use them for such programs. For instance, to supply water, the government has to incur costs in pumping water, carrying it over long distances, laying down pipes for distribution, treating the water for impurities, and finally collecting and treating wastewater. It meets these expenses partly from the various taxes that it collects and partly by charging a price for water. This price is set so that most people can afford a certain minimum amount of water for daily use. Public facilities relate to our basic needs, and the Indian Constitution recognizes the right to water, health, education, etc. as being a part of the right to life. Thus, one of the major roles of the government is to ensure adequate public facilities for everyone. But progress on this front has been far from satisfactory. There is a shortage in supply and there are inequalities in distribution. Compared to the metros and large cities, towns and villages are underprovided. Compared to wealthy localities, the poorer localities are underserviced. Handing over these facilities to private companies may not be the answer. Any solution needs to take account of the important fact that every citizen of the country has a right to these facilities, which should be provided to him or her in an equitable manner.